Just in case you've been living under a rock the last couple of days, former U.S. President and GOP frontrunner Donald Trump, indicted on 37 counts of mishandling classified documents. This is him in Florida.
When he went to this restaurant right after the indictment and he said, "Oh, free food
for everyone."
And then he walked out without paying for anything.
Oh my gosh.
Which the grift continues. And so, you know, we're sitting here with a bowl of chips. This really should be a bunch of popcorn because I couldn't get enough of it.
I loved it. You're like, this is delicious.
It is, and the whole thing is, I mean, it's unprecedented. Yeah. And there's so much to unpack about it that we wanted to bring in
our man Reggie,
our Steele and Vance Washington correspondent, because we've co-opted him, Reggie Cecchini. Hi, Reggie.
Hello.
All right, you're probably exhausted. Can we just start by breaking down this piece of it? Because it seems to be Donald Trump is kind of changing tactics here and there. Now he seemed to be saying, yeah, I did it, but I was allowed to do it. And that's his defense now, because that's not true, right?
It's definitely not true, and the evidence that was laid out in that nearly 50-page indictment by Special Counsel Jack Smith is overwhelming, and according to his former Attorney General Bill Barr, is damning. But here you have the former president saying, "Look, I was able to take these documents with me. I was able to kind of have them around because I can declassify things." He's said in the past he can declassify things just by thinking about it. But both the Department of Justice and the National Archives in D.C. have pushed back to say that the documents belong to the government. They belong to the people. They were not allowed to be at Mar-a-Lago. And because there was such a fight to get these records back, some of them did go back, but the ones that he's alleged to have been hoarding that had such an intense level of classification that some of the classification levels themselves were classified. That is what the crux of this issue is here. So when Donald Trump says he was allowed to have them, he is facing vigorous pushback from both National Archives and from the Department of Justice.
So, Reggie, there's so much to dig into here, but let's talk about the whataboutism that's at play. As you mentioned, those documents, like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the location of nuclear secrets and defense setups, like the Five Eyes documents that are alleged to be a part of it? Can you give us a little bit of a list of what is at play here in terms of national security risk?
Yeah, and look, we need to point out that we don't know exactly what's in these documents because they are so classified. They're classified to the point of where Trump's legal team doesn't even have access to these documents because they don't have the proper clearance. That's something that they have to try and get now over the next couple of weeks, according to the judge overseeing the case. But you're right. These are documents that would normally be seen by the highest members of government or people with the highest levels of a classification ability, up to and including governments from other countries, like the Five Eyes countries, like Canada. So again, it puts that kind of reputation and credibility on the line of the United States, but it's nuclear secrets. It's plans to attack other nations. It's information that would have to do with personnel that may be on covert missions that should only be seen by a few people, but were ultimately within arm's reach of people walking around a golf club.
In a bathroom.
Which is crazy, yeah, in a bathroom and on the ballroom, stage and all the rest of it. But, to your point about the whataboutism, we have people, I would think people would be like, oh my God, we're talking about nuclear secrets and, really sensitive military documents. And
spies,
yet,
people.
The Trump supporters in the base are saying, but what about Hillary and her emails and back to that? And what about Pence had documents? And what about Biden had documents by his Corvette? But it's not the same.
It's not the same. And look, I talked to supporters of Donald Trump when I was outside of the courthouse on Tuesday, and they were parroting and echoing many of those same lines, in that Donald Trump was allowed to have these documents. He was allowed to have them because he was the president and he could declassify anything. But at the same time, they didn't want to accept the reality that Donald Trump is in this indictment on camera saying, well, look, when I was president, I could have declassified them. I'm not really supposed to have these right now. But to his supporters, they say, well, look, if other people like Hillary Clinton or President Joe Biden or former Vice President Mike Pence had these documents, then they're not facing charges. This is a two-tier justice system. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the investigation into the documents with Joe Biden, that is still ongoing, but they've been handed back. The Mike Pence documents, they were handed back. The Hillary Clinton use of her email server, the emails were eventually handed back to the National Archives, and ones that had no kind of interest in the government, they were destroyed. This is a very different case facing Donald Trump.
Is it unprecedented also, Reggie, that the reaction is so unusual from the Republican leaders around Donald Trump, given the the Bill Barr-ness of this, as you mentioned, to have him say this is serious, and to still see so many in the GOP going, he's still our guy. I'd vote for him anyway.
Yeah, look, it is interesting to see people turning on Donald Trump. But remember, these are people that are no longer in some form of power within the government. They are, ex-members of the administration, someone like former Attorney General Bill Barr. But I think what is interesting here is to see how people are responding now that are actively trying to overtake Donald Trump in the GOP race. Someone like Mike Pence, who is saying, look, Donald Trump is innocent until proven guilty, but at the same time, these are serious charges and this is a serious case. You have other members who are kind of trying to take a second dance to this by saying, well, look, we need to wait to see how this plays out, because ultimately here attacking Donald Trump could lead to the base attacking you, and you may not be able to overtake Donald Trump if and when or potentially he gets thrown out of the race. So this really is putting Republicans basically across the board in a position of having to wade incredibly delicate waters here, because he is still the front runner. He is still the quote unquote leader of the party, and they are all simply trying to fall in line with him while at the same time looking out for their own skin in this game.
Wow. Can we talk about possible motive? Because we haven't really learned a lot about that. And some people are suggesting, well, was he going to squirrel it away and perhaps sell it to the Saudis? Or is it just that Donald Trump cannot accept the fact that he is not the president, the election was stolen, and all the lies that he's been floating, and that he just wanted it because he's like a big immature baby or something? I mean, I don't know. What do you make of it?
So look, it's possible that, there is still a part of the former president who wishes that he was still in power, and this is that ability for him to kind of cling on to something that he refused to accept that he had lost a long time ago. But at the same time, there is long-standing reporting that Donald Trump was someone who is very into kind of, tokens and mementos and things that remind him of the power that he once had, be it in the business world or in the political world. And he himself thought that it was kind of interesting and cool to be able to show this off to people. The indictment talks about how he was, possibly holding a map in front of somebody who had no level of any kind of security clearance. And Donald Trump saying, look, isn't this kind of cool? I know I shouldn't be showing this to you, but this is something that I have. He had, a kind of an affection towards or an affinity towards boxes and the things that were inside of those boxes, and is reported to have known what would be inside each and every box around him, and if somebody had been rifling through it. This is somebody who just latches onto kind of physical tokens and mementos from his past.
Wow. And he loves nothing more than to swallow up the news cycle, and he's certainly doing that. He's sucked all the oxygen out of the news world, certainly south of the border, as we look on from north of the border. At least we get a little bit of coverage of other things up here, but watching all of the major news networks in the U.S. right now is really quite something. Trying to keep track of all of the charges in various jurisdictions that have already been established or are still yet forthcoming, Reggie. Where are we going from here in terms of not only this case, but perhaps pending litigation? Obviously, we haven't even talked about Georgia.
And what's interesting about Georgia here, Jody, is that we learned over the last couple of days that there were the police chief from in and around Atlanta in Fulton County actually sent people to Miami and sent people to New York to figure out the kind of security process for if and when the president happens to be charged in the Fulton County investigation, which is linked to the attempts to subvert the 2020 election. And we know from the district attorney there, Fani Willis, that there could be a potential indictment that comes down sometime before the end of the summer. That's the reporting that's been going on for the last couple of weeks here. So as the former president faces these state-level charges in New York, this current federal indictment, which could go to trial possibly as early as August, there's a chance that there could be additional indictments to come down that kind of layer on top of that, making it incredibly difficult for him to be able to figure out a schedule when it comes to campaigning, especially when the first Republican debate is also set to come down at the end of August.
We've only got about 30 seconds left. Trump could potentially be facing something like 420 years behind bars. I mean, clearly that's likely not going to happen. But do you think that, A, he will go to jail, what the odds are, and do you think he would ever consider a plea deal?
I mean, look, anything is possible here. I think we need to see how the defense team is going to play this when it comes to trying to create a delay here. We know this is a former president who in any legal case has worked to delay a trial as long as he can. In the middle of a campaign now and with a Trump-appointed judge, there's a real possibility that this could try to be delayed until sometime after the election, because if he were to win that, you cannot indict or go after or continue a prosecution against a sitting president. So that is something to watch for here. Whether or not he takes a plea deal or makes a deal with another possible contender in the race to say, look, would you offer me a pardon if I'm convicted? This is what the world is watching for right now.
Those posturing for pardons is terrifying. Reggie, I need you to put it in, we would like you to put it in your calendar now. First Thursday after Labor Day, start of season 2 of Steele and Vance. We're going to need a debrief because Lord knows what's happening this summer on this file. Thank you for doing this.
Appreciate it.
Reggie Cecchini.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. We could have kept on going, but we also have something else we want to dig into.
Yes.
It's very populist. It has to deal with travelers. If you're an air traveler and you dodge the baggage fees by stuffing an oversized carry-on in the overnight bin, a warning, carry-on cheats may be about to pay the price this summer. We'll explain when we come back.
We will. And a little bit of a viewing party. Hello. Let's say hello. Who are we saying hello to
this
here?
Is Leah
and Lady Smith.
Hello. Love that. Lori, hello, Lori. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate our viewers, don't we?
And Maureen.
Hi,
Thanks
Maureen.
for checking in, Maureen. We love that you love our show and us ladies. If you want to be a part of our viewing party, this is how you get involved. We will be right back as Steele and Vance continues.